Hello fans of the MPL and welcome back for another week of the Minors Season 4 Power Rankings, this time for Week 1. I am your host Richard and I am not alone. I am joined once again by my wonderful co-host Noah. Why don't you introduce yourself?
What's going on, everyone? My name is No Pun Intended, and I hope you're really enjoying yourself and you're excited to hear our Power Rankings for Week 1.
Yes, we're very excited to get into this. We're going to try to keep it a lot quicker this time, so we're actually just going to get right into it with the recap of the games this week. Starting off, the first game we had was the FC Poplio versus the San Francisco Arcaniners. FC Poplio brought Hoopa U, Rotom Wash, Crobat, Alola Marowak, Mega Gallade, and Venomoth, and the San Francisco Arcaniners brought Forretress, Cofagrigus, Mega Sceptile, Tauros, Alakazam, and Braviary. The game ended up in a 2-0 victory for the FC Poplio.
Next up on our docket is the Chicago Kyurem Blackhawks against the Montreal Habsols. Chicago bringing Mega Medicham, Necrozma, Thundurus, Roserade, Comfey, and Heatran, and Montreal choosing to bring Mamoswine, Cobalion, Mega Blastoise, Cresselia, Vikavolt, and Umbreon. Chicago earning a 4-0 win.
And next we have the North Carolina Tyranitar Heels versus the Houston Soul Rockets. North Carolina brought Donphan, Megalopony, Zapdos, Volcanion, Frostlass, and Celebi, whereas the Houston Soul Rockets brought Mew, Diggersby, Skarmory, Electabuzz, Nihilego, and Blaziken. The game ended in a 5-0 victory for the North Carolina Tyranitar Heels.
Next up, the Vancouver Stealth Rocks against the Jersey Dwebbles. Vancouver choosing to bring Toxapex, Gothitelle, Raikou, Landorus T, Snorlax, and Mega Beedrill, while the Jersey Dwebbles chose Miltank, Decidueye, Como-O, Magnetric, Hitmonlee, and Gyarados. Vancouver bringing home a 2-0 victory.
And then next we have the Maine Red Clawitzers versus the Rotterdam Staraptors, with Maine bringing Vaporeon, Clefable, Entei, Scolipede, Excadrill, and Xurkitree, and the Rotterdam Staraptors bringing Infernape, Mega Gardevoir, Tyranitar, Lickilicky, Gliscor, and Blastoise. This game ended in a 2-0 victory for the Maine Red Clawitzers.
Moving on to the Anaheim Altarias against the Oklahoma City Thunderous. Anaheim's group of 6 being Azumarill, Tangrowth, Megaladios, Metagross, Thundurus T, and Darmanitan. And Oklahoma City's being Mega Aerodactyl, Ferrothorn, Tornadus T, Zygarde 50, Drapion, and Seismitoad. Anaheim hanging on to win 2-0.
And for the penultimate game this week, the Bullet Punch Club versus Colorado Avalugs. Bullet Punch Club bringing Piloswine, Mega Diancie, Dragonite, Tentacruel, Rotom Heat, and Tornadus I, whereas the Avalugs brought Keldeo, Delmise, Mega Charizard X, Bronzong, Mandibuzz, and Jolteon for our closest game this week at a 1-0 victory for the Bullet Punch Club.
And rounding out Week 1 is Rose Radenborg taking on the Portland Trail Blazekins. The Rose Radenborg bringing Mimikyu, Mega Manectric, Greninja, Celesteela, Virizion, and Azelf, and Portland choosing Magnezone, Wobbuffet, Pineco, Zygarde 10, Latias, and Silvawi Normal. Portland pulled out the win 2-0.
And with that concluded, we will get into our regular power rankings for this week. It is going back to our standard format of 16 teams, each ranked separately. Before we begin, though, I just have to point out the fact that my top 5 highest-rated teams from the last week all lost, and 3 of them lost to teams in my bottom 5, including one of the teams I gave a perfect rating of 10 to, so clearly, I'm off to a great start, and I know what I'm talking about. Take my word for it. But anyway, moving into the first team that we have at number 16, we both have the Houston Soul Rockets. Some early over predictions against the Frostlass really set Houston on the back foot. He let important offensive threats get paralyzed. There was some unfortunate hacks that contributed to a bigger loss than otherwise might have been, but I don't think that the overall result would have changed much. Noah.
Yeah, I also had the Soul Rockets at 16. Once the Skarmory got Trick Specs, I found he had to use Nihilego and Electabuzz as defensive switch-ins, which they're not necessarily the best. Everything he had left when the score was 4-6, and he finally got the specs off of Skarmory. He just couldn't come back from those 2 early losses. He did have a nice Tectonic Rage Mew, though. So we move on to number 15. I had the New Jersey Dwebbles, and you had Rose Radenborg. So for the Dwebbles, the reason I put the Dwebbles at 15, honestly, much like Houston, their Z-Move user, in this case Gyarados, was honestly the best thing I saw out of the team. I'm very surprised Cloud didn't bring more setup for Carney's Trap and Snap core. He really had nothing to take out both the Toxapex and the Snorlax, and he was reliant on Carney bringing a specific matchup, which you can't rely on that sort of thing. Richard.
As for the Rosa Radenborg, he had some difficulty playing around Pineco and Andrew's Trappers in Magnezone and Wobbuffet. There was the misplay around the Wobbuffet with Virizion, which kind of opened up the potential for Portland's Zygarde 10% to set up and sweep. That's about all I have for them. Moving on to our number 14 teams, I have the Portland Trail Blazekins, you have the Montreal Habsols. Going into the Portland Trail Blazekins, there were lots of gimmicks this game. I don't really understand the Latias Virizion exchange. Coil Zyger 10% pulled back a grim-looking game for the Trailblazers. Noah.
So number 14, I had the Montreal Habsals. I gotta be honest, Aster used Cresselia and Umbreon much better than I had expected in my pre-draft power rankings. But I'm still worried that his team is one bad read away from getting swept, and that's what happened with Comfey this week. This is more based off of a projection for the future than it is for this game, because he didn't necessarily play bad, but I think his strategy is going to rely on a lot more work than other teams have to do. So going to number 13, I had the San Francisco Arcaniners, and Richard had the Colorado Avalugs. So for the Arcaniners, they lost to Magic this week. It really seemed as though that George had kind of lost his knowledge on certain Mons. He lost 2 Mons to Marowak. The substitute play on Tauros was a bit of a misread, and that put him down to a deficit that he couldn't necessarily overcome. And I feel as though that if he gets down to that deficit, his team just kind of breaks apart. And finally, he just didn't seem to know what a Hoopa Unbound was. When he saw Z-Snatch, he had to rely on Sash Zam in order to kill it, and that kind of showed a bit of a lack of foresight on his end. Richard.
So for the Colorado Avalugs, a Guavberry recycled Bronzong, absolute heat set, and actually rather effective. There were some misplays around the Tornadus Eye and the Tentacruel, but he very nearly pulled it back in the late game. It was a close 1-0 loss, and an impressive effort overall. I think definitely the game of the week for sure. And hey look, no Chansey, no Shuckle, coincidence? I think not. Before we move on to the next team, though, I just would like to point out really quickly that the reason that I have Fog so low and you have them a bit higher, and I have San Francisco a bit higher and you have them at this rank number 13, is because of my own kind of constraints within the way that I do power rankings. I would definitely agree that Fog deserves to be higher and that George maybe should be quite a bit lower in my rankings, but just because of my own constraints and the fact that I don't like to give teams huge leaps up or down means that I have to put these teams where they are. But we can move on now to our number 12s. I have the Vancouver Stealth Rocks, you have the Portland Trailblazers. So for the Vancouver Stealth Rocks, tricking a Scarf onto the Manectric turn 1 with Gothitelle was questionable. There were a few other questionable plays that Carney made throughout the game, but otherwise he played fine. He got a bit lucky with Poison Hacks against the Miltank and the Gyarados, which were kind of crucial. It put them on timers and made them much easier to stall out with Toxapex. A win is a win though, it was a decent win, but Carney definitely needs to play a bit more thoughtfully in the future, and he can't always rely on outstalling his opponents. That would be my warning. Noah.
So number 12, I have the Portland Trailblazers. They're my lowest ranked winning team. And because he didn't necessarily post his match until after we were recording this, it's really difficult to say what he was going for with his team. He had to win quite a few 50-50s to have a chance of winning, such as the Wobbuffet play on the Virizion. He got very fortunate that Dan didn't put max speed into his Azelf so that Zygar was able to kill it with 1,000 arrows, and with the clicking counter on the Virizion, he could have very well easily gone for Encore and Dan would have gotten a kill and won the game. And having to rely on those predictions may not suit him well in the long run. So moving on to number 11, I have Rose Radenborg. You have the Anaheim Altarias. I'll start things off. For Rose Radenborg, they had a rather cookie-cutter team. It worked okay. I'm not concerned about not bringing the Shed Shell on the Celesteela. It's more of a hindsight play, but I can't understand why he wouldn't put max speed into Azelf when Zygarde 10 is a mon that is designed to clean up the late game, and his team gets easily worn down. And that's kind of what I fear going into the future, and this match did really nothing to quell those fears. Richard.
So for the Anaheim Altarias, the excellent Grass Knot bluff with Thunderous Tea towards the end of the game was very crucial. He did a great job playing around the Rain Dance Seismitoad and running down the rain turns. Overall, it was just a solid prep and a very good win. And moving on to our number 10 teams, we both actually have the Chicago Kyurem Blackhawks in this spot. So for the Chicago Kyurem Blackhawks, really, what more is there to say other than calm mind, comfy sweep? It was just a really solid point of prep and a great execution. Noah.
Yeah, for me, the reason I don't, even though he got the sweep, he did mention early on in his commentary that he fell behind. His sets, Aster's bulk generally outlasted his own sort of bulk, but thank goodness he did manage to proc the Berry onto the Comfey to take on the Cobalion. I was a bit concerned that if Aster had brought Victini or Bulu or some other heavy offensive threat, it wouldn't have worked out in the same way, but overall, he still got a win. I have to give him some credit for that. So going on to number 9, I had the Vancouver Stealth Rocks, you had the San Francisco Arcaniners. This was a bit of a haphazard win for Carney. He did know to keep the Toxapex and the Snorlax alive as his bulky core. He perfectly executed the Gothitelle trap play on the Dragon Dance Homo, but I felt like if Cloud had brought more setup, Carney would have had a more difficult road to winning his game. Richard.
So for the San Francisco Arcaniners, this was a quick and very offensive game, only 15 turns. Hyper offense is definitely not George's strong suit, which he admitted himself in his video. I was not impressed by the prep or the playing. The prep was rather uninspired and somewhat predictable. I don't think the score is reflective of the outcome. A 2-0 loss seems like a close match, but the FC Poplio's Gallade never even hit the field, and Rotom Wash only came in on the last couple turns to clean up the game. Magic basically had control for pretty much most of the game. Moving on to our number 8 teams, I have the Oklahoma City Thunderous. Noah, you have the Rotterdam Star Raptors. For the Oklahoma City Thunderous, this was also a relatively fast and offensive game. Darmanitan, what's your switch-in? The only two resists on the team were offensive Mons in Mega Aerodactyl and Life Orb Seismitoad, and I found it kind of ironic that he brought 2 flying types to counter Tangrowth, and he ended up not being able to kill it due to some unfortunate hacks at the end. Noah.
So number 8, I put the Rotterdam Raptors. They were against my number 1 ranked team in the post-draft power rankings, and they really had a very solid base and solid strategy against one of the most talented teams in the league. Particularly, I loved that Gliscor was EV to live Vaporeon attacks. I loved SD Lickilicky. The main reason I can't put him any higher, in addition to the fact that he lost, is because he made too many mistakes, and he needs to cut down those sort of things. Clicking SD on Lickilicky instead of Wish when he was low on health, forgetting Entei had E-Speed, and choosing to stack Gliscor over T-Tar to the Scolpede were reasons I put it down at 8. So, at number 7, I had the Colorado Avalogs, and Richard chose the Montreal Habsols. Much like Richard said about, I loved Keegan's Bronzong set. Recycle plus Ogwall Berry was great for the matchup, especially considering it had a lot of pressure on it, being the one check that he had to Mega Diancie. Mega Mandibuzz was a cool bring. If Uzi had brought Buzzwole, I think we'd be talking about it a bit more. As it stands, it's just kind of a footnote. However, he put too much pressure on some of his defensive mons, not just Bronzong, but also Delmise and Jolteon to check things, and when they couldn't take the heat, Uzi was just able to bring in Mega Diancie at the end to finish off the game. Richard.
So for the Montreal Habsols, he kind of misplayed around Comfey and got swept by it, but otherwise the reason that I didn't put him down as low as maybe I could have, it was a really decent game, with Aster actually able to outplay and dispatch 2 of the huge offensive threats in Mega Medicham and Thunderous Eye. The lack of answers to Calm Comfey and the unwillingness to predict around Heatran switch-ins ultimately resulted in a 4-0 loss, so that's why I have to move them down a little bit more. He was pretty high up for me to begin with. But moving on to our rank 6 teams, I have the Jersey Dwebbles. Noah, you have the Oklahoma City Thunderous. For the Jersey Dwebbles, really what this game came down to is his inability to break through Toxapex. He had limited answers to Raikou, and both of them were just able to outlast his team. I don't think he played poorly, I just think that he didn't have enough responses to get around Carney's bulk once something started going down. Noah.
So number 6, I put the Oklahoma City Thunderous. I felt they had a very evenly matched game with the Anaheim Altarias. It was just one of those kill one Mon, kill one Mon, kill one Mon. And I felt as though I couldn't really dock them. I think they both played very well. I don't blame them for switching into Zygarde on the Seismitoad. I would have assumed it had Grass Knot as well. T-Wave Ferrothorn was a very nice brain to cripple Megalodios. He did a lot to try to win the game, but ultimately his offense just fell short of Ace's offense. Speaking of Ace, my number 5 team is the Anaheim Altarias. Richard has the Rotterdam Raptors in this position instead. So for the Altarias, against a team that I thought had significantly more powerful Mons, he was able to hold his ground and answer back Neo's threats with offensive strategy of his own. He kept Tangrowth relatively healthy, knowing it was just one check to Seismitoad, which was a very smart play, and he had a very skillful bluff with Thundy T and Grass Knot on the Seismitoad that I felt really made him deserve his top 5 status. Richard.
So for the Rotterdam Star Raptors, a few misplays, a miscalculation, and a bit of misprep all influenced this game to some extent. Having returned instead of Facade on Lickilicky was a bit of an oversight, which he did recognize in his video. Even so though, it was a very close loss, so I didn't feel like I could move them down too much, especially because they did face a very highly rated team and they were highly rated themselves. Moving on to number 4 though, I have the Bullet Punch Club, and you have the Bullet Punch Club, so we both have the Bullet Punch Club. Getting into the Bullet Punch Club, it seemed like the Avalogs did have a slight edge for most of the match, however, Uzi's thorough thinking through of every possibility of every play he could potentially make eventually led him to see an opening that allowed him to claw his way back into the latter portion of the match. It was a very impressive game on both sides. Like I said, definitely Game of the Week material. Noah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Mega Diancie was just a phenomenal win condition for Uzi, and he realized it. Rotom Heat getting off a lot of damage mid-game. The way he played when Tentacle was on Bronzong and just standing to Rapid Spin as he gained help with Black Sludge was very smart. He kept the Tailwind in the back to make sure he could outspeed Scarf Keldeo with his Mega Diancie. The only kind of flaw I saw was he did get somewhat flustered with Keegan's strange sets, but that might be more due to him doing a live comm rather than a post comm, so I don't think I can really hold that against him. But now our number 3 team, we both had FC Poplio with the bronze position. Magic didn't flinch in the face of the Fortress Hazard stack. Even though his team is very momentum-based, he was just able to fire off hit after hit after hit and put a lot of pressure on George's team. He turned a team that's mostly momentum-based into one that could generally stay in and get off big hits. And Z-Stats Troop of You probably would have won him the game if not for the sashed Alakazam. Richard.
Yeah, so the FC Poplio accurately guessed the general roles of 2/3 of George's team just from the team preview, which kind of gives credence to my prior statement of George's team being somewhat predictable. He had some very solid prep, Magic did, and well thought out playing. He managed to stay ahead of the hyper offense game, and that enabled him to pull off the victory. Moving on to our number 2 ranked teams, we actually have our number 2s and 1 switched around. At number 2, I have the North Carolina Tyranitar Heels, you have the Maine Red Clawitzers. For the North Carolina Tyranitar Heels, this was a pretty big 5-0 victory to start the season. He made some generally great plays and predictions, though there were some instances of hacks in his favor. I was happy to see Frostlass put in the finest of work. Zapdos also hindered the Soul Rockets team with Thunderwave against Blaziken and Mew. The misplay with the Volcanion and Z Sunny Day was pretty bad, but ultimately inconsequential. He does acknowledge his poorer plays though and sees how to make them more optimal in the future, which is very important for a coach to do. Noah.
So number 2, I chose the Maine Red Clawitzers. This is the game where I kind of found that Tone doesn't really have a great normal switch in, his only resist being Excadrill, but he was still able to make plays around that Licky set, knowing that he could sack Clefable and Revenge with Circuitry was a very good decision. He identified keeping Scolipede healthy as a Zmon to break past the Gliscor or the Tyranitar on Freeze's side. And that's really all I have to say, but I will move on to my number 1 team. I chose the Tyranitar Heels, and you instead went with the Clawitzers, who we each had at number 2 in positions. So talking about the Tyranitar Heels, they had the most dominant win, a 5-0. Trick Frostlass was a great call against a team that many of the Mons have a lot of defined roles and do not like being specs locked. And choosing to bring Zapdos and Donphan was great as well. They were a stable core that generally checked most of Adam's threats. This was the only no-stress game, I would say, and that's why I felt the need to put him at number 1. Richard.
So I had the Maine Red Clawitzers at number 1. They were our combined top-ranked team in the preseason rankings, and I believe they were my 6th highest-rated team. I'm not entirely sure on that, but given that the 5 teams that I had rated above Maine Red Clawitzers had all lost, that kind of left the top position open to them. Letting the Vaporeon go down to Toxic with the Staraptors and Fernape still around was a bit risky, but luckily Scolipede was still around to bail him out. A 2-0 victory is a very solid win. I really could have put these teams at either position. I just think that this game was a little bit more solid, and like I said, I had them rated a little bit higher going from the preseason rankings. That is why Maine Red is at my number 1. But I think that that will conclude our power rankings. I hope you guys enjoyed the shorter format. I hope it was not too grueling to get through. Noah, thank you once again for joining me. I definitely appreciate having you here each week, and I look forward to working with you again in the future, this time, not in the past. And any closing words you have for the people watching at home?
My pleasure to be working with you, Richard. Make sure, guys, to subscribe to the NPL channel to get more Power Rankings videos, more potential coach interviews, and all the sort of National Pokeball League content that you may be desiring.
And definitely check out all the coaches in the description, especially if you want more details on how these matches actually played out. That will be it for us. We're going to sign off right now, and have a good day.